Winter's last snow had vanished from the mesas, leaving behind fields of blooming desert wildflowers and the earthy scent of damp sandstone after weeks of scattered rain. The Navajo people welcomed the season with gratitude. For them, spring was more than warmer days. It meant fresh herbs, flowing streams, and another chance to gather the medicines that had protected their families for generations. 24-year-old Nayeli rose long before sunrise. The first pale light had barely touched the eastern horizon when she stepped outside the small hogan she shared with her grandmother. The old woman was already tending the morning fire. She looked up with knowing eyes. "You're leaving early." Nayeli smiled while fastening a woven gathering basket across her back. "The yucca roots will be easier to find before the sun gets too high." Her grandmother nodded. "And the canyon?" "I'll be careful." The elderly woman walked over and gently adjusted the turquoise necklace resting against Nayeli's chest. "My mother once told me something. The desert gives medicine, but it always asks for respect in return." Nayeli squeezed her grandmother's weathered hand. "I haven't forgotten. I never will." With that, she mounted her chestnut horse and disappeared into the awakening desert. The trail wound through towering sandstone cliffs that glowed deep red beneath the rising sun. Jackrabbits darted through sagebrush. A pair of golden eagles circled silently overhead. Everything felt peaceful, familiar. Nayeli had walked these canyons since she was a little girl. Every bend in the trail carried a memory. Every plant seemed to greet her like an old friend. She knew which flowers eased fevers, which roots soothed swollen joints, which leaves stopped bleeding. Her grandmother had spent years teaching her that every living thing carried a purpose. The desert was never empty. Only those who refused to observe believed it was. By mid-morning, Nayeli reached a narrow canyon where thick clusters of yucca and desert willow grew beneath scattered boulders. She tied her horse beneath a cottonwood tree, then knelt beside a patch of rich soil. Carefully, she loosened the earth with a small digging stick. One healthy root after another disappeared into her basket. Hours passed unnoticed. The basket slowly became heavier. Satisfied with her progress, she decided to collect one final bundle of herbs before beginning the ride home. A narrow crack between two sandstone rocks sheltered several healthy desert plants from the afternoon heat. Nayeli smiled. "Grandmother will be happy." She knelt again, brushing loose sand aside with one hand. She reached beneath the shaded rock. Everything happened in less than a heartbeat. A sharp warning rattle exploded through the silence. Before she could pull away, a thick western diamondback rattlesnake struck with terrifying speed. Its fangs sank into the outside of her left calf. Pain shot through her leg like fire. The snake instantly recoiled. Its patterned body coiled tightly for another strike. Nayeli stumbled backward. Instinct forced her to freeze. The rattlesnake watched her for several seconds, then slowly disappeared beneath another rock. Silence returned. Only the wind remained. Nayeli looked down. Two deep puncture wounds had already begun bleeding through the leather of her boot. Her heartbeat thundered inside her ears. She knew exactly what had happened. There was no confusion, no denial. She had been bitten by one of the most dangerous snakes in the Southwest. The nearest doctor was more than a day's ride away. No one knew where she was. No one would come looking until sunset. She glanced toward her horse. It stood nearly 50 yards away, too frightened by the snake to approach. If panic took control now, she might never reach it. Nayeli closed her eyes. Just for a moment. She remembered sitting beside her grandmother as a child. Fear spreads faster than poison. The old woman had always spoken those words whenever teaching medicine. Calm your mind first. Then save your body. Nayeli inhaled slowly. held the breath, then released it. When she opened her eyes again, the panic was gone. She carefully sat against a large sandstone boulder. Every movement became deliberate. She removed her boot. The bite marks were already beginning to swell. Her calf burned with intense pain. She reached into her basket. Not for food. Not for water. But for clean cloth strips she always carried while gathering herbs. She gently wrapped the wound to help protect it from dirt without cutting off circulation. Next, she snapped 2 straight pieces of desert willow. Using leather cord, she secured them alongside her lower leg to limit movement. Every unnecessary step could encourage the venom to spread faster. Her hands never shook. Years of watching her grandmother treat injuries had become instinct. She knew this would not cure the bite. But every correct decision could buy precious time. When she finally tried to stand, a wave of dizziness swept over her. She steadied herself against the rock. The canyon suddenly felt much larger than before. The ride home had become a race she could not afford to lose. Clouds gathered unexpectedly above the mesas. A cool wind swept through the canyon. Nayeli took one slow step. Then another. She could already feel the tightness spreading upward through her injured leg. Still, she refused to stop. Far ahead, her horse lifted its head as if sensing her struggle. Nayeli forced herself forward. Each step demanded more strength than the last. Then, she reached for the small hunting knife hanging from her belt. Not in panic. Not in desperation. But with quiet determination. She tore a strip of leather from her saddle bag. Placed it gently between her teeth. And prepared to continue treating the wound before beginning the long journey home. She knew the next few minutes might decide whether she would ever see her grandmother again. The wind grew stronger. Dark clouds rolled across the Arizona sky. Nayeli tightened the leather strap around her gathering basket before taking another careful step. Her left leg throbbed with every heartbeat. The pain no longer came in sharp bursts. It had settled into a deep, burning ache that reached all the way to her knee. She knew exactly what it meant. The venom was moving. Not quickly. But steadily. She refused to let fear determine her pace. Her grandmother had taught her something years ago. The desert rewards patience. It punishes panic. Those words echoed in her mind with every breath. Her chestnut horse finally recognized her voice. The frightened animal slowly approached. Nayeli rested one hand against its neck. Easy. You didn't leave me. You were only scared. The horse lowered its head as though apologizing. Normally, she would have climbed into the saddle with one smooth motion. Today, even lifting her injured leg felt impossible. She used a nearby rock for support. Then slowly pulled herself onto the horse. She deliberately kept her left leg as still as possible. Every unnecessary movement could worsen the swelling. Once seated, she turned the horse toward home. The familiar canyon suddenly felt endless. For nearly an hour, everything remained quiet. Only hoofbeats echoed through the narrow pass. Then, the first warning signs began. Her fingertips tingled. Her vision blurred for a few seconds before clearing again. Sweat gathered across her forehead despite the cool spring breeze. She stopped beside a small stream. Not because she wanted to rest. Because she needed to think. Her breathing had become faster. She knelt carefully beside the water. Opening her basket, she removed several freshly gathered desert herbs. One bundle contained crushed leaves her grandmother often carried while treating swollen joints and inflamed wounds. She ground them together using 2 smooth stones. Mixed them with a small amount of clean water. Then gently spread the cool herbal paste around the swollen tissue surrounding the bite, avoiding unnecessary pressure on the puncture itself. The cooling sensation brought slight relief. Not a cure. Just enough comfort to continue. She rewrapped the clean cloth around her leg. Then climbed back into the saddle. The afternoon sun disappeared behind heavy storm clouds. Thunder rolled across the mesas. Rain was unusual this time of year. But not impossible. The first drops fell. Within minutes. The desert transformed. Dry washes began filling with rushing water. Dust became mud. The narrow trail grew dangerously slick. Nayeli urged her horse forward. Not faster. Safer. She knew these canyons better than almost anyone. But swollen legs and blurred vision made familiar ground feel unfamiliar. Her breathing became heavier. Her hands tightened around the reins. The edges of her vision darkened. She whispered to herself. Stay awake. Just a little farther. Several miles away. Marcus Reed guided a supply wagon through the storm. The previous winter had nearly taken his life. Since returning home, he had accepted work transporting lumber, flour, medicine, and tools between scattered settlements across northern Arizona. The wagon moved slowly across the muddy trail. Rain drummed against the canvas cover. Marcus scanned the road ahead. Years of traveling had taught him something. Storms always left surprises behind. Sometimes fallen trees. Sometimes stranded travelers. Sometimes worse. A flash of woven reed caught his attention. Something floated rapidly through the muddy water crossing the trail. He pulled the wagon to a stop. Climbed down. Reached into the rushing current. It was a gathering basket. Inside. Fresh medicinal herbs. Several yucca roots. And a small turquoise bracelet. Marcus frowned. Nobody abandoned valuable medicine without a reason. He looked upstream. Fresh horse tracks. Then. One set of human footprints. Uneven. Dragging badly. His expression changed immediately. Someone was in trouble. Farther up the wash. Nayeli's horse stumbled while crossing rain-soaked ground. She slipped from the saddle. Landing heavily against wet sand. Pain exploded through her injured leg. She tried to stand. Her body refused. The world spun around her. The basket had already disappeared into the rushing water. Rain soaked her clothes. Her breathing became shallow. She blinked several times. Everything seemed strangely quiet. She knew she couldn't stay there. Flash floods could arrive without warning. She forced herself onto her hands. Crawled toward higher ground. Each movement became slower than the last. Finally. She collapsed beside a large rock overlooking the wash. The storm blurred everything into gray. Marcus followed the tracks until they suddenly ended. His eyes searched the rocky slope. Then he saw movement. Barely noticeable. A hand. Resting motionless beside a sandstone boulder. He ran. Sliding through wet gravel. Nayeli. He didn't know her name. The word never left his mouth. Instead he called, "Can you hear me?" No answer. He reached her. She was barely conscious. Rain streamed across her face. Her lips had turned pale. Marcus immediately noticed the splinted leg. The clean bandage. The herbal dressing. He had seen enough injuries to recognize careful treatment. Whoever she was. She had done everything she could before collapsing. He gently checked her pulse. Weak. But steady. He looked toward the darkening sky. Then back toward the flooded trail. There wasn't a moment to waste. Marcus carefully lifted her into his arms. Carried her back toward the wagon. then secured her as gently as possible beneath dry blankets. He turned the horses toward the distant Navajo settlement as rain continued pounding the canyon. Night had already fallen when the wagon finally reached the small cluster of hogans. An elderly Navajo woman rushed outside the moment she recognized the horse. Nayeli. Marcus carefully carried the unconscious young woman inside. The grandmother immediately knelt beside her granddaughter. She examined the swollen leg, the splint, the herbal dressing. Then she looked at Marcus. "Did you do this?" Marcus quietly shook his head. "No. She did." The old woman closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them again, they were filled with both pride and worry. She gently touched Nayeli's forehead before whispering, "She made every right decision." Her voice grew quieter. But now, she looked toward Marcus. Only her own strength can decide whether she lives until morning. Morning sunlight filtered softly through the smoke hole above the hogan. Its warm glow stretched across woven blankets and clay pottery before finally reaching Nayeli's face. She stirred. Every muscle in her body ached. Her eyelids felt impossibly heavy. Slowly, she opened her eyes. The familiar scent of cedar smoke drifted through the room. She recognized the ceiling immediately. She was home. A quiet sigh escaped her lips. Her grandmother looked up from the fireplace. Relief flooded the old woman's face. Without saying a word, she crossed the room and gently took Nayeli's hand. "You came back to me." Nayeli managed a faint smile. Barely. Her voice was little more than a whisper. Marcus, who had been sitting quietly near the doorway, stood as soon as he realized she was awake. "You scared all of us." Nayeli turned toward him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she recognized the man. The same black traveler she had met briefly several months earlier while gathering herbs near another canyon. He had politely asked for directions to a trading post. She had pointed him toward the correct trail. Nothing more. Yet here he was. "You brought me home." Marcus nodded. "I found your basket first. The river almost carried it away." Nayeli looked toward the corner of the room. Her woven basket rested there, still filled with herbs. Someone had recovered everything. She smiled quietly. "Thank you." Marcus shook his head. "I should be thanking you." He glanced toward the careful splint on her leg. "I've seen people panic over far smaller injuries. You stayed calm." "I don't know how." Her grandmother slowly sat beside the bed. "You remember what I always told you?" Nayeli smiled faintly. "Fear spreads faster than poison." The old woman nodded. "And you listened." She carefully uncovered the injured leg. The swelling remained severe. But it had stopped spreading. The venom was dangerous. If you had run. If you had ignored the injury. If you hadn't kept your leg still. She looked toward Marcus. He would have found only your body. Silence filled the room. Marcus lowered his eyes. Only then did he fully understand how close she had come to dying. Recovery came slowly. For nearly 2 weeks. Nayeli rarely left the hogan. Marcus remained nearby longer than he had planned. His supply wagon had already continued without him. He didn't regret it. Every morning, he carried fresh water from the spring, collected firewood, repaired the broken fence surrounding the horse enclosure. The old grandmother often watched him from the doorway. One afternoon she smiled. "You work as though this were your own home." Marcus chuckled. "Someone once taught me. When people save your life, you help however you can." The old woman glanced toward Nayeli, who was sorting dried herbs beside the window. "No." She answered softly. I think kindness was already part of you. By early summer, Nayeli could finally walk without leaning on a stick. The scar from the snake bite remained visible. A permanent reminder. Not of weakness, but of survival. She returned to gathering herbs. This time, Marcus insisted on accompanying her. Not because she needed protection. Because he wanted to learn. As they walked through blooming desert plants, she pointed toward a patch of prickly pear. Medicine. Then toward another flowering shrub. Poison. Marcus laughed. They look almost identical. They do. Nayeli replied. That's why knowledge matters. She handed him a small bundle of leaves. The desert never forgives guessing. Several weeks later, the lesson proved more valuable than either of them expected. Children from the nearby Navajo settlement spent the afternoon playing beside a shallow creek. Their laughter echoed between the canyon walls. Without warning, a frightened scream shattered the peaceful afternoon. Everyone turned. 9-year-old Thomas Begay had collapsed beside a cluster of rocks. His older brother pointed toward the brush. A rattlesnake. Adults rushed toward the child. Voices overlapped. Some shouted for water. Others screamed for blankets. Panic spread almost instantly. Nayeli reached the boy first. Everyone stop. Her calm voice cut through the confusion. The crowd slowly fell silent. She knelt beside Thomas. His breathing was fast. His eyes filled with fear. My leg. It hurts. Nayeli gently placed one hand on his shoulder. Look at me. The frightened boy did. Good. You don't need to move. We're going to help you. She carefully examined the bite. Then turned toward the adults. Keep him completely still. Don't let anyone carry him by the injured leg. She quickly wrapped a clean bandage over the wound to protect it. Then used 2 straight branches to gently support the lower leg and limit movement. Every instruction came calmly. Clearly. Without hesitation. Marcus was already saddling his horse. What do you need? Nayeli looked up. The nearest doctor. Marcus didn't wait another second. He carefully lifted Thomas onto a padded blanket across his horse. I'll ride slowly. We'll keep his legs steady. Nayeli nodded. That's exactly right. The horse disappeared down the canyon trail. The following afternoon, Marcus returned. Thomas sat safely behind him. Tired. Weak. But smiling. The boy's mother burst into tears the moment she saw her son. She embraced him tightly. Then turned toward Nayeli. You saved my child. Nayeli shook her head. We all did. She looked toward Marcus. He got him to the doctor. She looked toward the elders. You kept everyone calm. Then she smiled at Thomas. And he was brave. That evening, the entire community gathered beneath the cottonwood trees. The oldest Navajo elder slowly stepped forward. His weathered hands held a small leather medicine pouch decorated with turquoise beads. Everyone grew quiet. He looked directly at Nayeli. When you were a little girl, your grandmother said you listened to every lesson. I believed her. He paused. But today, I saw something even greater. You did not allow fear to lead. You allowed wisdom. He raised the medicine pouch for everyone to see. For many years, this belonged to the healer who protected our people. Today, it belongs to the woman who protected our future. Nayeli stood speechless. Her grandmother quietly wiped away a tear. Marcus smiled proudly from the edge of the gathering. The elder carefully placed the medicine pouch into Nayeli's hands. Then he said words the entire community would remember for years. Some people survive. But very few teach others how to survive. Summer settled gently across the Arizona territory. The harsh spring storms had passed. Wildflowers covered the valleys. The creek beneath the sandstone cliffs flowed quietly once again. Life had returned to its familiar rhythm. Yet something inside the Navajo settlement had changed forever. Children no longer wandered into the desert without first learning how to recognize danger. Parents carried simple bandages and splints whenever they traveled. The lessons that had once belonged only to healers were now shared openly. Knowledge had become a gift instead of a secret. And every lesson began with the same name. Nayeli Begay. Several weeks after Thomas recovered, Marcus returned from the frontier town with an unusually full wagon. The children ran toward it with excitement. "What did you bring?" Marcus smiled. "A little bit of everything." He lowered wooden crates one by one. Inside were clean bandages, medical cloth, glass bottles for storing medicine, small notebooks, pencils, illustrated books showing poisonous snakes native to the American Southwest. Even the elders gathered around in surprise. Nayeli picked up one of the books carefully. She slowly turned each page. Painted illustrations of rattlesnakes, coral snakes, gopher snakes. Every drawing was remarkably accurate. Marcus noticed the expression on her face. "I thought, if children can recognize danger before they meet it, they'll have a better chance." Nayeli smiled. "My grandmother always says, the best healer is the one who prevents suffering." Marcus laughed softly. "I think she and my mother would have become good friends." The following weekend, the entire settlement gathered beneath a grove of towering cottonwood trees. Marcus built several wooden tables. The elders carried woven mats. Families arrived from neighboring camps. Some traveled half a day just to attend. Word had spread quickly. The young woman who had survived a rattlesnake bite alone was going to teach others how she stayed alive. Nayeli stood quietly before the crowd. She wasn't used to speaking in front of so many people. For a moment, she simply looked around. Children, parents, grandparents, travelers, cowboys. Even several ranch families from nearby settlements had come to listen. She took a slow breath. Then began. "I didn't survive because I was fearless." The crowd listened in complete silence. "I survived because my grandmother taught me what to do before I ever needed it." She lifted 2 straight willow branches, holding them beside a volunteer's leg. "This can keep an injured leg from moving." She demonstrated each knot slowly, making sure every child could see. Next, she showed how to protect a wound with clean cloth. Why unnecessary movement could make serious injuries worse. How staying calm allowed clear thinking. She never claimed to know everything. Whenever someone asked a question beyond her experience, she answered honestly, "I don't know. But together, we can learn." Her humility earned even greater respect. After the lesson ended, a gray-haired rancher stepped forward. His weathered hat rested in both hands. "I've lived out here for 30 years. He looked directly at Nayeli. "I always believed the desert was something to conquer." He glanced toward the surrounding mesas. "Today I realized. It was trying to teach me all along." Nayeli smiled. "My grandmother says, the desert isn't our enemy. It simply asks us to pay attention." The old rancher nodded. "I'll remember that." As the months passed, the gatherings became a tradition. Every season, families met beneath the cottonwoods. Marcus taught travelers how to build emergency stretchers. The frontier doctor demonstrated proper wound care whenever he visited. The elders explained which plants healed and which should never be touched. Children practiced tying splints, recognizing animal tracks, learning the difference between caution and panic. The lessons spread beyond the Navajo settlement. Nearby ranches adopted them. Stagecoach drivers carried simple medical kits. Shepherds taught their sons and daughters the same skills, without anyone realizing it. One woman's survival had quietly transformed an entire region. Nearly a year after the snakebite, a young cowboy arrived at the settlement leading an exhausted mule. Behind him sat an elderly traveler. His lower leg was heavily wrapped in clean cloth, supported by two straight wooden splints. The cowboy removed his hat. "I was taught what to do at one of your gatherings. If not, he wouldn't have made it." The frontier doctor examined the older man. After several minutes, he smiled. "You probably saved his life." The young cowboy looked toward Nayeli. "No," he answered. "She did." Nayeli gently shook her head. "I only passed along what someone once gave me." She turned toward her grandmother. Everything had started there, beside a small fire, with one patient teacher. That evening, the settlement celebrated the end of another successful harvest. Music drifted across the valley. Children laughed as they chased one another beneath strings of lanterns. Marcus walked over carrying something carefully wrapped in soft leather. "I have one last gift." Nayeli unfolded it slowly. Inside rested a beautifully crafted journal. The cover was made from hand-tooled leather. Pressed into its surface was the image of a rattlesnake surrounded by blooming desert flowers. The first page had already been written. She read the words silently. "For every lesson you refuse to let disappear, someone you've never met may one day live because of it." Nayeli closed the journal carefully. She looked toward Marcus. "I'll fill every page." "I know you will," he answered. As the celebration faded into the quiet of evening, Nayeli climbed the same sandstone ridge where, 1 year earlier, a rattlesnake had changed her life. The desert looked different now. Not because it had changed. Because she had. Far below, children practiced the first aid lessons she had taught that morning. Some laughed when they tied their splints crooked. Others patiently corrected them. Her grandmother slowly joined her. Neither woman spoke for several minutes. The setting sun painted the mesas in shades of gold and crimson. Finally, the old woman smiled. "Do you know what makes me happiest?" Nayeli looked toward her. "I almost lost my granddaughter," the old woman said quietly. "But instead, I found the woman she was always meant to become." A tear slipped down Nayeli's cheek. She gently reached for her grandmother's hand. Marcus watched them from the valley below. He smiled before turning back toward the children. The future no longer belonged to fear. It belonged to preparation, to compassion, to people willing to teach what they knew. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the Arizona mesas, Nayeli opened the journal once more. On the very first blank page, she wrote 6 simple words. "Knowledge shared is a life saved." The warm desert wind carried the laughter of children across the valley. One snake bite. One courageous decision. One lesson passed from grandmother to granddaughter, had become a legacy that would protect countless lives for generations to come.